You built this spreadsheet with your own two hands, which is either impressive or a red flag depending on how you look at it. And right now you're staring at a row you're almost positive is a mistake. It took you 19 years to save your first $250,000. 19 years of brown bag lunches, skipped weddings, and telling people you were too busy to make it. 19 years of watching a number inch forward. And according to your own spreadsheet, the next $750,000, 3 times the money, shows up almost 3 years sooner than that first $250,000 did. So you check the formula. You widen the column. You assume you dragged a decimal somewhere in row 4. You didn't. The row is correct. This isn't a video about discipline, or manifesting, or some guy in a rented Lamborghini telling you to trust the process. This is a video about one specific arithmetic threshold where the math quietly switches sides, where you stop pushing the number and the number starts pulling you. My name is Yank, and I've spent an unreasonable share of my adult life staring at compounding curves the way other people watch sports highlights. Stick around, because there is a single line, one number you can calculate in about 9 seconds, that decides whether the claim in the title is true for you or a flat-out lie. And I have to warn you now, there's a version of this where $250,000 is nowhere close to halfway. You need to find out which version you're living in. Hit that like button and let's dig in. Let's define the claim properly, because the internet repeats it like it's a law of physics, and it isn't. Obviously, $250,000 isn't halfway in dollar terms. In dollars, you're only a quarter of the way there. The claim is about time. It says the years it takes you to crawl from zero to that milestone roughly match the years it takes to go from there to a full million. Which sounds absurd, because that second stretch is 3 times bigger in dollars. Here's why it's still possible: going from $250,000 to $1 million is exactly 2 doublings. 250,000 becomes 500,000. 500,000 becomes $1 million. That's your entire back half, just 2 doublings. And a doubling doesn't care how big your number already is. Doubling $40,000 and doubling $400,000 take the same amount of time at the same rate of return. The market doesn't charge you extra for having a bigger balance. Your own effort does. Let me introduce you to Dana, who's going to handle all of today's arithmetic. She's 31, works in medical billing, brings home about $70,000 a year, and puts $500 a month into a target date fund she picked because the year in the name was closest to when she wants to stop working. That's the entire strategy. She has an investing app she's opened 4 times, twice by accident. In year 2 she skipped her roommate's bachelorette party in Nashville to keep that $500 flowing. At $500 a month, earning 7%, how long until she crosses $250,000? 19 years and 7 months. That's a brutal sentence to hear out loud. She'd be 50 years old before she got there. And for most of those 19 years, her account looks like a savings account with an attitude problem. By year 3 she'd have about $20,000, which is a used Corolla with 90,000 miles and a check engine light. By year 5, around $36,000. By year 10, roughly $87,000. She's putting in $6,000 a year, and the market is handing back pocket change and a receipt. Year 7 is where Dana nearly walks away from the whole thing, and if you've been investing for a while, you know this scene. She opens the app on purpose for once, sees $54,000, and does the math. She personally put in $42,000 of it. 7 years in, and the market's entire contribution is $12,000. She figures, reasonably, that she could just stop and be fine. That's the moment. Not a crash, not a panic, just an ordinary Tuesday and a balance that doesn't feel worth the bachelorette party she missed. Most people quit in that exact room, and they quit while being completely correct about the arithmetic sitting in front of them. What they're wrong about is assuming that arithmetic is the whole picture. Dana doesn't stop, which is the only interesting decision she ever makes, and the only one you actually have to copy. So, from that $250,000, how long until she has a full $1 million? Same $500 a month, same 7%, nothing about her life changes. 16 years and 10 months. Compare that, 19 years and 7 months to build the first $250,000, versus 16 years and 10 months to build the next $750,000. Her back half is 3 times the money and nearly 3 years faster. For Dana, the milestone isn't halfway. It's better than halfway. She's already past the hardest part and has no idea, because nothing on her screen ever announced it. So what happened? Because it feels like cheating, and I want to show you the actual mechanism instead of just waving at the word compounding like it's a magic spell. There's a specific balance at which your portfolio earns more in a year than you personally contribute. Call it your crossover point, the day your money starts out earning you. You find it by taking what you contribute in a year and dividing it by your expected return, expressed as a decimal. That's the engine underneath everything in this video, and in a few minutes it hands us the exact line I promised you at the start. Dana puts in $6,000 a year. 6,000 divided by 0.07 equals $85,700. The day her balance touches roughly $86,000, her portfolio starts contributing more to itself each year than she does. She becomes the junior partner in her own retirement account. Nobody sends her a letter. There's no confetti. Her app doesn't push a notification announcing that she's now the less important half of the operation. It just happens quietly in year 10 while she's at work arguing with an insurance company. That's why the $250,000 milestone has the reputation it has. It's the first big round number that sits safely past your crossover, assuming you save the way most ordinary people save. By the time Dana gets there, her account is throwing off around $17,500 a year, while she's putting in $6,000. Her money is outworking her almost 3 to 1. Her grind didn't end because she got better at investing. It ended because it stopped being the engine. Now here's where I have to be straight with you, the halfway claim is not universal. It's conditional. And to show you what it's conditional on, meet Corbin. He's 34, a project manager, makes about $140,000 a year, and he's aggressive, $2,000 a month, every single month, at that same 7%. Corbin hits $250,000 in 7 years and 10 months. Dana needed almost 20 years. Corbin did it in under 8. If you're Corbin right now, you're feeling extremely good about yourself, and you should enjoy the next few seconds. How long does he need to get from there to a full million? 11 years and 8 months. Do the subtraction yourself, 7 years and 10 months on the front end, 11 years and 8 months on the back end. For Corbin, the milestone is well short of halfway. His back half takes roughly 50% longer than his front half, which sounds like a penalty for saving too aggressively, and I promise you it isn't. Run his crossover the same way, $24,000 a year divided by 0.07 equals $342,900. So when Corbin crosses $250,000, he's still the engine. His deposits still outrank the market. He hasn't handed over the wheel, because for him, that handoff happens later. So here's the honest version, $250,000 is halfway when your contributions are modest enough that the market ends up doing the heavy lifting, which describes the overwhelming majority of people watching this video. And here's the part that should change how you feel about your own boring monthly transfer, the less you're able to put in, the more true this whole video is for you. Dana gets the better deal on time precisely because she had to lean on compounding instead of her paycheck. That's not a participation trophy for being broke. That's just the math. Which brings us to the line I promised you. It's exact. Work out the contribution level where your front half and your back half take exactly the same number of years. Then look at that person's crossover point. At 5%, it's $125,000. At 6%, $125,000. At 7, at 8, at 10%, $125,000, every single time. Your return rate changes how long the whole journey takes. It never moves that line. And $125,000 is exactly half of $250,000. So here's your law, and it isn't a rule of thumb, the milestone is halfway to $1 million when your crossover point is half the milestone. Which means you can skip calculating the crossover entirely and just ask one question instead: what does $250,000 earn in a year at your expected return? At 7%, that's $17,500. Now cut that in half, $8,750 a year, or $729 a month. That's your line, and it's the only number from this whole video you need to remember. Stay under $729 a month, and the $250,000 is halfway or better, with the easier stretch still ahead of you. Go over it, and you're Corbin. The milestone shows up early, and the back half is the longer climb. Dana, at $500 a month, is comfortably under it. Corbin, at $2,000 a month, is nearly 3 times over it. And most people watching this are under that line, which is the entire point of this video. Charlie Munger described this line 30 years before anyone ever charted it. He told a young man at a shareholder meeting that the first $100,000 is brutal, but you have to grind through it, and after that you can ease off the gas. Nobody who quotes him ever adjusts for inflation. Munger's $100,000 is worth about $222,000 today. So when the internet shifted the milestone up to $250,000, it wasn't being dramatic, it was just doing the currency conversion. Which means if you're under the line, there's a reward waiting that almost nobody finds out about, because almost nobody sticks around long enough to collect it. Let me show you what that reward actually is, because it's the single most absurd number in this entire video, and I've checked it 4 times hoping it was wrong. Take Dana at the exact moment she crosses $250,000, and imagine everything stops. Not because anything bad happened, pick your own reason: a layoff, a kid, a pay cut to go do something she actually likes. She never contributes another dollar again. At 7%, with nothing added, that $250,000 becomes $1 million in 20 years and 6 months. At 8%, 18 years. At 10%, 14.5 years. That's the payoff: get $250,000 invested by your late 30s, never add another cent, and you're still on track to be a millionaire in your late 50s. You become, technically, a professional bystander. Not because you were smart, not because you picked the right thing, but because you were early and then you were absent. The most consequential financial work of your life is the part where you do nothing, and it happens right after the stretch that felt like it wasn't working at all. Quick aside, I'm curious, drop a comment and tell me which side of your crossover you're on. Not your balance, nobody needs your balance, just above or below. I read these, and it tells me what to make next. And by the way, I opened a free community where I break down how to build and scale a faceless YouTube channel from scratch, which is honestly the fastest way I know to move the contribution number we've been talking about all video. It costs nothing, and the link is below. Anyway, back to your math, because I owe you the uncomfortable half. Everything up to this point assumes 7% forever, smoothly. Reality doesn't do smooth. 4 things will push your crossover further out than you're expecting, so let me put them on the table instead of pretending they don't exist. First, the average return is a statistical fiction. Across roughly a century of market history, only about 5 calendar years actually landed between 8 and 12%. The average is where the extremes cancel each other out, not where the years actually live. From 2000 through 2009, the S&P 500 returned about -1% per year including dividends, for an entire decade. $1 million invested at the start came out to roughly $990,000 10 years later. Congratulations, you invested through an entire decade and the market handed you a bill. Anyone who lived through it will tell you it felt considerably longer than 10 years. And your crossover point decides how much that should scare you. If a decade like that lands before your crossover, while your balance is still small and your own deposits are the engine, it's survivable, and it honestly helps, because every automatic transfer is buying shares on sale. Run a decade like that over Dana's first 10 years, and it barely dents her long-term outcome. It makes her year 7 considerably uglier, and her year 30 slightly better. Run that same decade over her 50s instead, and it's a completely different video, because by then the market is doing the heavy lifting and her deposits are a rounding error, and it can add 5 to 10 years onto her back half. Which means Corbin, sprinting to 250,000 while still short of his own crossover, is better protected than he realizes. It's not just the average return that matters, it's the order those returns arrive in. Second, and this one actually changes your line, nobody is forecasting 7% right now. As of this recording, the Shiller-Cape ratio sits around 42, the second highest sustained reading in roughly 140 years of market history, behind only the dot-com peak. Vanguard's 10-year outlook for U.S. equities is roughly 4 to 6%. Goldman Sachs published a note projecting around 3%. So the consensus lands somewhere between 3 and 6%, and by consensus I mean several firms disagreeing by more than the number they're forecasting. They've been wrong before, in both directions. But rerun everything at 5% and watch what happens to your line. It drops from $729 a month down to $521 a month. Dana's crossover jumps to $120,000. Her front half stretches to 22.5 years, and her back half to 22.2 years, still almost exactly symmetrical, just 3 extra years of year 7s along the way. Third, your finish line is quietly running away from you. $1 million, 20 years from now, at 2.5% inflation, buys about $610,000 worth of today's groceries. At 3% inflation, $554,000 worth. The word million has been slowly deflating since your parents said it and meant a house, a boat, and never working again. Aim higher than the number in this video's title. Fourth, fees, which happen to be the cheapest fix in personal finance and entirely within your control. Take Dana coasting on her $250,000. At 7%, she needs 20 years and 6 months to reach $1 million. Put her in a fund charging 1% instead of a fraction of that, so she nets 6% instead, and she needs 23 years and 10 months. That 1%, printed so small on her statement she'd need reading glasses and an actual reason to care, just cost her 3 years and 4 months of her life, not 3 years of money, 3 years of time she doesn't get back. It also drags her crossover point from $86,000 out to $100,000, so she spends longer stuck in the grinding half too. A 1% fee charges you twice and discloses itself once, in gray print, in a footnote. It's the most expensive rounding error you will ever agree to. Now let me show you where you actually stand, because there's a gap between the arithmetic and the country you live in, and pretending otherwise would make me one of the guys I make fun of. If your net worth is under $200,000, you are not behind, you are the middle. Median household net worth in this country, according to the Federal Reserve's most recent survey of consumer finances, is $192,900. Here's the number people quote at you instead, the mean, which is roughly $1,063,700, over 5 times higher, in the same country, in the same survey, because a handful of enormous fortunes drag the average into millionaire territory while your actual neighbors sit under $200,000, most of it locked up in the house they sleep in. The average American also technically has slightly fewer than 2 legs. That's what averages do. Anytime someone hands you an average net worth, they're handing you the fortune of people you will never meet. Your retirement account tells the identical story. Fidelity puts the average 401k balance around $141,000, with a median of $32,800. Vanguard reports an average of $168,000, with a median of $44,000. So if you're staring at a balance in the $30,000 range wondering what's wrong with you, the answer is nothing. You're standing exactly where half the country is standing. And only about 4.6% of households have $1 million or more sitting in retirement accounts. Among people 55 to 64, right at the door of retirement, that number is 9.2%. None of this is supposed to feel normal. If you're saving at the median rate in this country, you're putting away roughly $500 a month, which happens to be Dana's exact number, which means your first climb genuinely does take about 20 years. The system isn't built so your first $250,000 is easy. It's built so your first $250,000 is the entire test, and most people wash out somewhere in years 3 through 7, when the balance is finally real money but the growth is still invisible and the crossover point is still just a rumor. And I want to be careful here, because there's a version of this video that ends with, "just try harder," and that version is garbage. 6% of retirement plan participants took a hardship withdrawal last year, the highest rate on record. The top reasons were avoiding eviction and paying medical bills. If that's been you, you didn't fail a discipline test. You live in a country where the emergency fund and the retirement account are frequently the exact same account, and where the thing standing between you and your line isn't your character, it's a deductible. But here's the hard evidence that your version of this actually works. Fidelity tracks people who have saved continuously in the same plan for 15 years straight. Their average balance is $558,300. Not stock pickers, not people with some clever system, just people who didn't stop. Their average 401k millionaire is close to 59 years old and has been in the same account for about 25 years. There is no shortcut hiding anywhere in that sentence. There's a very long, very boring line, and the people who are still standing in it. Every single one of them had their own year 7. They just didn't act on it. So take the one line from this video and leave the rest behind. Not the $250,000 itself, which is really just a round number somebody picked because it sounds significant. $729 a month at 7%, or whatever half of your expected annual growth on a $250,000 works out to at your own rate of return. Stay under it, and the hard half is already behind you, with the bigger half being the easier one. Go over it, and you're buying speed instead of leverage, and you should know that's the trade you made instead of finding out at 50. And wherever you actually land, the grind you're in right now is not a verdict on you. Before your crossover, your savings rate is the only lever you really have, which is exactly why this stretch feels like pure grind. It is pure grind. After your crossover, the market becomes the bigger lever, and your job shifts from producing to simply not getting in the way. Two completely different games, played on the same account, and nobody ever tells you the moment you switched from one to the other. I'm not a financial advisor, and none of this is financial advice, it's arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't know your life, your health, your kids, or what your industry looks like 9 years from now. But that spreadsheet you built, the one with the row you thought was a typo, you didn't stumble onto a trick in there. You found the exact place where the sentence stops being about you. For 19 years, that account grew because you kept showing up. And then, with no notification and no confetti, it started growing simply because it existed. The $250,000 was never the achievement. The $250,000 is just your receipt for surviving the part where it was entirely on you.